Jake Carter had seen a lot in his life: war zones, survival situations, and more near-death experiences than he cared to count. But nothing prepared him for the absolute lunacy of opening his mailbox on a crisp Monday morning and finding a letter that might as well have been a declaration of war. He read the first few lines once, then again, his brain refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. The Homeowners Association was officially informing him that his farm, his 30 acres of blood, sweat, and hard-earned freedom, had been reclassified as community land. It was no longer his. It belonged to the neighborhood now. Effective immediately. Jake let out a slow breath, gripping the letter so hard that the edges crumpled under his fingers. His farm, where he had spent the last 15 years raising cattle, fixing tractors, and enjoying the solitude he had worked so damn hard to secure, had apparently been turned into a public playground without so much as a courtesy call. His pulse pounded against his temples as he reread the part about how the HOA would soon begin development for public access walking trails, a dog park, and recreational areas. There was even a suggestion of a small playground on his land. Slamming the mailbox shut, Jake stomped toward his truck, his boots crunching against the gravel of his long driveway. He wasn't the kind of man to let people walk all over him, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let some overstuffed HOA committee claim his property like they were royalty passing out land grants. He threw the truck into gear and sped toward the HOA office, gripping the steering wheel like he was ready to choke the life out of someone. The HOA office sat in the center of the suburban neighborhood that had slowly encroached on the edges of his farmland over the last decade. It was a sterile-looking building with neatly trimmed bushes and a sign that read "Community Office, working together for a brighter tomorrow." Jake yanked open the door and stormed inside, where a receptionist barely looked up from her computer before pointing toward a glass-walled office in the back. "She's expecting you," the woman said, as if Jake had been summoned rather than showing up to raise hell. Deborah Simmons, the HOA president, was a middle-aged woman with an ironed blouse, a stiff posture, and the kind of smug expression that made Jake's fingers itch to flip over her entire desk. She looked up from a neat stack of documents, adjusted her reading glasses, and smiled like a politician about to deliver bad news she enjoyed giving. "Ah, Mr. Carter. I was wondering when you'd stop by." Jake slammed the letter onto her desk. "What the hell is this?" Deborah folded her hands neatly, unfazed. "It's a notification about the reclassification of your land. It's all perfectly legal. The neighborhood development plan has been in the works for quite some time, and unfortunately, your land was within the zoning area for community expansion." Jake let out a sharp laugh, though there was nothing funny about any of this. "That's a nice way of saying you people are stealing my damn farm." Deborah gave him a sympathetic smile, the kind people use when they pretend to care. "It's not theft, Mr. Carter. It's community enhancement. The residents have expressed interest in more green spaces, and your property is the perfect location." Jake leaned forward, planting both hands on her desk. "I'm not part of your damn HOA." Deborah clicked her tongue and slid a folder toward him. "Actually, you are. Your property was originally purchased under a broader real estate agreement when this area was still developing. That means..." Jake didn't even look at the folder. "I bought that land before any of you even lived here." Deborah gave a little shrug. "Yes, but the original property agreement had a clause that..." "I don't give a damn about your clauses. That farm is mine. I never signed any agreement with your HOA." Deborah sighed as if he was a child throwing a tantrum. "It's all there in black and white, Mr. Carter. The amendment was passed last month. You had an opportunity to object, but as you didn't attend the meeting..." Jake's hand slammed onto the desk, making Deborah flinch. "I didn't attend because no one told me about it." She shook her head, her lips pursed like she was dealing with a troublesome student. "Not my fault if you don't check your mail regularly." Jake clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. He had half a mind to overturn her entire desk and walk out, but he knew that wouldn't fix anything. Instead, He grabbed the folder and turned on his heel, storming out before he said something that would land him in jail. He drove straight to his lawyer, Marty Feldman, an old friend who had helped him settle some land disputes in the past. Marty took one look at the document and let out a long, low whistle. "Jake, this isn't good." Jake threw himself into the chair across from Marty's desk. "Tell me something I don't know." Marty skimmed the document, his brow furrowing. "It looks like they found some buried clause from the original land agreement. Technically, because you never filed an official HOA exemption when the neighborhood expanded, they have some legal grounds to claim your land under the new zoning rules." Jake stared at him. "So, you're telling me they can just take my farm?" Marty hesitated before nodding slowly. "Not take, exactly. But they can enforce community use rights. That means they can start developing parts of it. You can fight it, but it'll take time and money." Jake leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "Unbelievable. This is my land, Marty." Marty sighed. "I know. And I can fight it. But it won't be easy. You need a backup plan in case the legal route doesn't work." Jake let the silence settle for a moment before looking up, something dark and determined flashing in his eyes. "You're right. I do need a backup plan." Marty's face twisted with concern. "Jake, what are you thinking?" A slow, wolfish grin spread across Jake's face. "If they want my land, they'll have to work for it. I'm about to make sure they regret ever trying." Marty groaned. "I don't like that look. What are you planning?" Jake stood up, already forming a list in his head. "A little home improvement. Let's see how much they like their community space, when it comes with electric fences, guard animals, and a whole lot of inconveniences." Marty sighed, rubbing his temples. "Just don't get yourself arrested." Jake chuckled as he headed for the door. "No promises." Jake spent the next 3 days working non-stop, fueled by sheer rage and a stubbornness that had kept him alive through 2 tours overseas. If the HOA wanted a fight, he would give them one. He had seen bureaucratic nonsense before, but this was something else. These people weren't just looking for a way to inconvenience him. They wanted to take what was his. That wasn't going to happen. He started with the fences. The old wooden ones had been enough to keep the cattle in, but they wouldn't do much against nosy suburbanites who thought they had the right to roam his land like it was their backyard. So he installed an electrified fence system, the kind used to keep predators out of high-value livestock areas. He wasn't looking to hurt anyone, but he wanted to make sure that if anyone tried to come onto his property uninvited, they'd get a nasty surprise. The voltage was just enough to give a good zap, enough to make sure they'd think twice before trying again. Next, he brought in reinforcements. He made a few calls and, by the end of the week, had 2 massive, aggressive bulls delivered to the property. Big boys, the kind that wouldn't hesitate to charge at anything they didn't recognize. He named them Thunder and Lightning. They weren't just there for show either. The HOA thought they were going to build a park? Let's see them do that when 2,000 pounds of muscle and horns were roaming around. He didn't stop there. He got himself a new set of security cameras, installing them along the perimeter of his property and near the fence posts. If the HOA tried anything sneaky, he'd have it all on video. And because he knew these people weren't going to play fair, he made sure to put up signs at every entrance to his property. Some were standard warnings, private property, no trespassing. Others were a little more direct, enter at your own risk, landowner not responsible for injuries. It didn't take long for the HOA to make their first move. Jake had just finished checking on the cattle when he heard the shouting near the front gate. When he got there, he found a group of HOA members, all dressed in their typical pressed khakis and overpriced sunglasses, standing at the entrance. Deborah Simmons was at the front, arms crossed, looking as smug as ever. Behind her, 2 men were standing with bolt cutters, clearly ready to cut their way through the fence. Jake leaned against the gate, arms folded. "Afternoon, folks. Something I can help you with." Deborah didn't even bother with pleasantries. "This fence is illegal. You can't block off community land. Jake smirked. Funny. That's exactly what I'm doing. She gestured toward the men with the bolt cutters. Take it down. The first guy stepped forward and reached for the fence. The moment the metal touched his hand, a loud crack filled the air, followed by a yelp and a spectacular display of flailing arms as the man fell backward into the dirt. His buddy jumped back, looking horrified as his friend twitched on the ground. Jake tried not to laugh. Whoops. Forgot to mention that's electrified. Deborah's face turned red with fury. You cannot do this. You are obstructing community access. Jake shrugged. Nope. I'm protecting my private property. There's a difference. She huffed. This isn't over. You're going to regret this. Jake watched as she stormed off, dragging her injured lackey with her. He had no doubt they'd be back. He just had to be ready. Over the next few days, the HOA tried everything. They sent landscapers to clear parts of his land, pretending it was already theirs. Jake had anticipated this and had dug a few strategically placed manure pits. The first landscaper who tried to drive onto his field ended up knee-deep in cow dung, slipping and sliding in a spectacular display that had Jake laughing so hard he nearly cried. Then came the joggers. Apparently, some of the HOA members thought they could simply start using his land like a park. That didn't last long. The first few who tried got an unexpected encounter with thunder and lightning. Watching a group of grown adults sprint for their lives as a pair of enraged bulls chased them across the field was possibly the best entertainment Jake had seen in years. And then there was the night raid. Jake had just finished dinner when his security cameras pinged an alert. A group of HOA members had snuck onto his property, cutting through a section of his fence. He grabbed his flashlight and shotgun, not planning to use it but wanting to make sure they knew he meant business. When he got there, he found 3 people. One of them was Deborah, trying to plant wooden stakes in the ground, marking spots for whatever nonsense they were planning to build. Jake flicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. You lost. Deborah jumped, nearly falling over. One of the men with her muttered a curse. Jake took a slow step forward. See, I was under the impression that trespassing is still illegal in this state. But maybe I missed the memo. Deborah straightened, trying to regain some of her composure. We have the right to survey this land. It belongs to the community. Jake chuckled. Funny thing about that. My security cameras say otherwise. And I'm pretty sure the sheriff will find this footage interesting. One of the men muttered something about leaving, but Deborah wasn't done. You're only making this harder for yourself. The HOA will not back down. Jake tilted his head. You ever see a bull charge at night? Deborah paled. What? Jake let out a sharp whistle. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of heavy hooves hitting the dirt echoed through the night. He saw Deborah's eyes widen just as a dark figure moved through the field. Run, Jake suggested. They did. The next morning, Jake made sure to post the footage online. Within hours, it had gone viral. People from all over the country were laughing at the HOA's misfortune. The comments were brutal, calling out their entitlement and cheering Jake on. Even the local news picked up the story, labeling it the Great HOA Showdown. But Jake knew this wasn't over. If anything, it was only just beginning. The HOA wasn't just going to give up. They would come back with lawyers, lawsuits, and every dirty trick in the book. That was fine. Jake wasn't backing down either. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. Jake had barely finished his morning coffee when he saw them. A fleet of black SUVs rolling down his dirt road like some kind of government raid. He didn't need to guess who was inside. Sure enough, as soon as the vehicles stopped, the HOA's smug leader, Deborah Simmons, stepped out, flanked by 3 men in expensive suits and one particularly grumpy-looking sheriff. They were done playing games. Now, they were coming at him with the law. Jake leaned against his porch railing, taking his time sipping his coffee as they approached. He could already see the frustration in Deborah's eyes. She was expecting him to be panicked, to see her legal team and crumble. Instead, he took another slow sip and let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Deborah cleared her throat and lifted her chin. "Mr. Carter, I assume you know why we're here." Jake smirked. "To apologize for trespassing on my land?" One of the lawyers, a thin man with an expensive watch, stepped forward, opening a folder. "We're here to inform you that the HOA is filing an official injunction against your unauthorized barriers and obstruction of community development. You are in violation of local zoning codes, and we have legal grounds to pursue the immediate removal of your fencing, livestock, and all deterrents you have installed." Jake nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. "So, let me get this straight. You're telling me I have to remove the fences that keep my cattle safe, get rid of my bulls, and open my land to people who don't own it?" Deborah gave a victorious smile. "That's exactly right." Jake grinned. "Not gonna happen." The second lawyer, a heavier man with thinning hair, sighed. "Mr. Carter, we are giving you a final chance to comply before we escalate this matter in court. You are facing serious legal consequences." Jake took another slow sip of his coffee. "Well, here's the thing. I had a feeling you might try something like this, so I did a little digging of my own." He reached behind him and grabbed a thick folder from his porch table, tossing it at the lawyer's chest. The man fumbled before catching it, flipping through the pages with a confused frown. Deborah snatched the folder and her face paled as she scanned the documents. Jake knew exactly what she was looking at. "I had a little chat with my lawyer, Marty. Turns out there's an old clause in my deed that predates your HOA's existence. That clause legally exempts my property from any and all community zoning regulations." The expensive watch lawyer blinked. "That's not possible." Jake grinned wider. "Oh, it's very possible. Not only that, but because of the legal mess you tried to create, I've now filed trespassing charges against the HOA for every single time your people stepped foot on my land without permission." He pointed to one of the papers in the folder. "That right there is a judge's ruling stating that all of your development plans are null and void when it comes to my property." Deborah's face turned an ugly shade of red. This is absurd. You can't just override the HOA's authority." Jake leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to twist the knife. "Deborah, let me make this real simple for you. You poked the wrong bear. You thought you could bully me into giving up my land, but you didn't do your homework. Now, not only are you losing, but your little HOA is about to face a whole lot of legal trouble." The heavier lawyer adjusted his tie, clearly sweating now. "Let's not be hasty, Mr. Carter. Perhaps we can find a compromise." Jake laughed. "Compromise? You mean after you tried to steal my farm, destroy my fences, and take me to court? No, I don't think so. In fact, I'm thinking about making things a little more interesting." He pulled out his phone and played a short clip. It was security footage of Deborah and her HOA goons sneaking onto his land at night, vandalizing his fence, and planting fake community access signs. The camera had caught everything, down to the exact moment when Deborah tripped over a rock and face planted in the dirt. The sheriff, who had been standing quietly until now, let out a low whistle. "Well now, that's a real bad look." Deborah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's taken out of context." The sheriff sighed and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Deborah Simmons, you're under arrest for trespassing and property damage." The other HOA members stepped back, looking anywhere but at their fearless leader as she sputtered in shock. "This is a mistake. This is all his fault. You can't do this." Jake took one last sip of his coffee as the sheriff led her away. "See you at the next HOA meeting, Deborah." The lawyers scrambled, throwing out empty threats and weak protests before retreating back to their SUVs. Within minutes, the so-called final showdown was over, and Jake was left standing on his porch, watching them drive away in defeat. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was glorious. The HOA, now leaderless and under scrutiny, faced lawsuits from multiple homeowners who had also been strong-armed over the years. Deborah, once the queen of suburban dictatorship, found herself at the center of a public scandal after Jake's security footage made the rounds online. People all over the internet hailed him as a hero, cheering on his victory over HOA tyranny. But the best part came a month later when Jake got an offer to buy the now-defunct HOA office building. With a little help from his lawyer and a few investors, he made the purchase official. Then, in the ultimate act of poetic justice, he turned the former HOA headquarters into a petting zoo for the local kid. As he watched families visit his newly opened farm-turned-attraction, he leaned against the fence, taking in the sight of children laughing, parents relaxing, and, in the distance, thunder and lightning peacefully grazing in their enclosure. His land was safe. His fight was over. And the HOA? They had finally learned that some people weren't meant to be messed with.